Okay. So we'll go with the Select Board first this time.
Harrison Mayotte.
Okay, Aaron?
I vote Jody Murphy.
Okay. Virginia?
Harrison Mayotte.
George?
Harrison.
Harrison Mayotte.
Harrison.
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 Okay, so Harrison, who's not present, will serve now as the alternate. I'd like to thank Jody Murphy for stepping up and,
Thank you.
you know, and before I entertain a motion to adjourn, I'd like to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah. And I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the joint Select Board and Chelmsford School Committee meeting for the purpose of the election. Do I have a
I'll
motion?
make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Take care.
Okay, it being 6:10, we're a little bit late getting started for this joint meeting of the Select Board, School Committee, and Finance Committee. And first of all, I wonder if you'd all join me in a pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Paul, I'll let you do the introductions and take
Thank you, Pat.
continue forward. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. As is our custom, we gather here at the beginning of December to formally begin the fiscal year 2025 budget process. Just this morning, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Department of Revenue approved the fiscal year 2024 tax rate, which is, the actual tax bills will go out the end of this month. And that sort of brings the conclusion of the current fiscal year's financing process. And obviously, we've got 7 months to go to close out the fiscal year. But tonight, as I noted, we formally begin the convening of the three boards as called for in the charter to begin the budgetary process for fiscal year 25. And, we'll hear this evening from our town accountant, Darlene Lucier, on the fiscal year 24 status of the operating budget. Our finance director, John Souza, will present an overview of the recommended capital plan committee fiscal year 25 capital improvement plan that was enacted last Thursday evening. And then we will hear from our superintendent of schools from the Shelby Valley Technical School District, Dr. Denise Pigeon. Will provide an overview of the vocational school district's fiscal year 25 budget development process and the capital needs in the vocational district. And then we'll transition to Dr. Lang, our superintendent of schools here in the town of Chelmsford, to provide an overview of the school department's fiscal year 25 budgetary outlook at this initial stage. I will then review the financial condition of the town, our revenue and expenditure forecasts at this time, and other related budgetary information. And then we'll close with the discussion and hopefully a consensus vote on, sort of our target overall budget level for the upcoming fiscal year. So without any further ado, I'll turn the microphone over to our town accountant, Darlene Lucier, to give us a status on the current fiscal year.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. I'm just going to do a brief overview of where we are for fiscal '24. I know we have a lot to cover tonight, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. The revenues that I'll be talking about tonight is actually through October. We're just closing out November, so I didn't have November's numbers to finalize. So these numbers for the revenues are through October 31st. Right now, we're at 42% of our total budget of fiscal '24. So we're in our targeted benchmark number of 33% at the end of October. We always look at the local receipts, and one of our largest local receipts is motor vehicle excise. Right now, we've only collected 10% of our $5.6 million budget to date, because we get our largest commitment for the year in January, February timeframe. I think we're looking at February for our large. What we have seen, though, from the commitments, we are above from where we were last year. I think this is due to really everything is driving is the cost of purchasing a vehicle is much more expensive than it was a year ago. And a lot of people now are being forced to buy electric cars. If you're going out to buy a new car, you pretty much have to buy an electric car, which is more expensive than the gas-driven vehicles. So these are driving up the cost and the price, the amount of that would be from motor vehicle excise coming in. Our local options meals tax, kind of the same thing. We're seeing an increase here. We're up 11% from prior year. But again, cost of meals, the food cost has actually gone up. If you've gone out to dinner and you tried to get, you order steak tips, they're probably, 50% more than what you had last year in cost. So that's also drives up the revenue with the coming in is really through the cost. Our hotel room occupancy is a little bit higher than prior years, by 5%. Again, the state is housing, in our local hotels, we're housing the homeless people in there, so we're getting revenue from the state for housing those folks. Building permits, very similar. We have an increase of 67% from a year ago. Not that there's much building going on in town. Talking with the building inspector, he said this is really due to the cost of materials. So when somebody's putting on a room, a deck, the cost to do business, to buy those materials has gone up tremendously, and the permitting fees are based on the cost of the project. So this is why we're seeing a higher amount of revenue coming in on the building permit side. Another big line item we have there is the interest income revenue. We've seen a significant increase from the prior year. I think this is due to the rise in interest rates. The market is stabilizing, and then we've seen an improvement in the investment market from last year. So it's really where we're making some good profits on that. Property tax collections, we do well on tax collection. John Souza, our tax collector, finance director, does a very good job in collecting all of the property taxes. I will be monitoring the revenues very closely, though, in reading what the state has just put out, and their revenue collections through November is much less than they had predicted. So I just want to kind of see where that might happen, if that's going to be done, flow down into the municipalities. So I'll be watching the revenues coming in for the next few months there. With our expenditures, we're generally, again, within the level of budget we should be, and we're 38.2%. These numbers are actually, the expenditures are through November. At this point, I don't see any concerns with budgetary spending, but again, I'll be watching all of these, budgets closely. We haven't really had any snow, so we don't know what our snow and ice budget's going to be looking like as we get into the winter season. So right at this point, everything looks pretty good. Just want to touch a little bit on a couple of the sewer enterprise and stormwater enterprise. If you look at the report that I gave you, it looks like we have almost we have a little revenue increase there. We'll see the rates. We did have an increase in our sewer rates for fiscal '24. But what's going to happen is you get your summer bill in the wintertime, and because we had so much rain this summer, I'm very interested to see what our commitment's going to be in January when we get our large commitment in sewer. I'm thinking we're going to see a decrease in our commitment. So I'm going to be watching, again, the revenue collection there when that commitment comes in. Stormwater, right now, we're actually in a little bit of a deficit there. In January, stormwater rates are going to be going up. Our DPW director will be increasing stormwater rates starting in January. They're looking at a tier-based system there and the number on usage. So that will be happening in January. So that should make up any deficit that we have in the stormwater when it comes to closing out the books at the end of the year. I always just kind of like to show the, just special revenues. These are kind of the things people don't see. They're outside the general fund. So the COA lunch, the school lunch, revolving accounts, reserve for appropriations, things that we see at town meeting that we've raised and appropriated at town meetings, and then other revenue and kind of donation accounts. The first one is just the COA lunch program. Again, they don't run a huge profit there, but they're fine. They always have they start off with a carryover balance from the prior year and then just going in what they use on a daily basis. And this account actually has, does have interest earned on this account. Same thing with their school lunch account. Again, they have a carryover balance from the prior year, and then they just draw down, and then any collections that come in through the lunch program. I'll just quickly, if anybody has any questions on these particular accounts, feel free to ask, but they're just going to run through them real quick. Revolving accounts, these are specific accounts. They have to, the money has to be used for these specific items. If you look under, we have some insurance accounts, building insurance, those type of things. This is where circuit breaker falls, lost books under the schools, the childcare, out-of-town tuition. These are all very specific revolving accounts. The money has to be used for these specific accounts. The reserve for appropriation, these really are the sewer betterments. We use these funds to cover some of our sewer debt. And you'll see those, or we see them at town meeting, that we reserve money out of these accounts to cover the sewer debt. And then all of the other revenue donations, these are kind of donation accounts. Again, they're specific. If somebody donates to a playground or a gift account, these are kind of all of these accounts that I have. They fall under either some planning board. We have some school accounts, town manager accounts, police, COA. They're just, basically a lot of them are donation accounts. We also have athletic activities under there, transportation, student activities, all fall under that, like, donation account, and they're specific to those. If anybody has any questions, that's really just where we are at 24. I don't see any concerns at this point, but I'll keep everybody up to date if I see. If what's happening with the state flows to us, I'll make sure everybody's aware of that.
Are there any questions for Darlene regarding the current fiscal year? Okay, great. So we'll now sort of transition over to fiscal year 25, and John Souza is going to present the capital plan recommendation. The themes that you're starting to hear, and you'll hear repeatedly throughout the evening, whether it's from us or from Dr. Pigeon and so forth, is there's three things that are really we're confronting right now as we're looking ahead for fiscal year 25 and beyond. That's obviously the impact of inflation. We're in a period of higher inflation than traditionally we've seen in the last few decades, and how that impacts communities and districts that are under provisions of Proposition 2.5. We're seeing increasing demands on capital for our infrastructure, and obviously those are impacted by inflation in terms of our capital needs and our aging buildings and equipment and infrastructure. And then the last one, and you'll hear it repeatedly, is the uncertainty regarding state aid in terms of what will we see for Chapter 70 money proposed by the governor next month, and what will the legislature ultimately bring to us, and then just the uncertainty in terms of the state's fiscal problems and how those may come down to the cities and towns. So with that, I'll turn the microphone over to John Souza, who'll present the Capital Plan Committee's proposed fiscal year 25 capital improvement plan.
Thank you, Town Manager Cohen. Good evening, everyone. The Capital Planning Committee recently reviewed 41 projects totaling over $11.2 million. And as the town manager described, the needs were much greater, making this one of the most challenging years and with capital planning that I've ever been involved in. After careful consideration, the committee voted to recommend approval of 21 projects totaling $5.88 million, with 3 of the projects on that list receiving partial funding. And the list that I distributed to you lists all of the projects that are recommended for funding. 20 projects were actually deferred. Additionally, 2 larger school roof projects were recommended for funding outside of the capital plan. This includes the South Row School roof at a cost of about $1.2 million. The reason for that is that's potentially eligible for MSBA funding under the Accelerated Repair Program. So given that, it made sense to, to go through that process and to try to obtain some state funding for that. as well as the McCarthy School roof. That's a very large project, which will probably be accomplished over 2 years. The original request was for $1.2 million in fiscal year '25 and for $2.2 million the following year, but I'll describe how that was funded as we go through the process. So this first slide just breaks out all of the capital plan by functional area. You can see with the different departments. And as you look through this list, you'll see that community services for, which includes senior center, library, and health department, that accounts for about 15% of the total capital plan, or $875,000. Next is public safety, including police and the fire department. Those items account for about 21% of the total, and I'll describe that a little more as we go through the presentation. Public Works accounts for about 19% of the plan. So that gives you kind of an overall summary. And if we go to the next slide, this shows the financing. So all of the projects that we'll go through total just over $5.88 million. And then we have two other sources of funding. The first is what we call recaptured funds for $83,705. Those are funds that are from that are remaining from prior year projects that have been completed. So basically, the prior year projects completed, there are usually little remainders in some of those accounts. Town accountant Darlene Lucia goes through with the department heads and works to recapture those for us so we can use them to defray the borrowing for the new plan. And then also the next item on the list, school administration agreed to provide $65,000 of funding from the Child Care Revolving Fund to cover a portion of the Westlands boiler replacement that we'll talk about in a moment. So when you deduct those two amounts, the net amount to be borrowed is just over $5.7 million. If we go to the next slide, we'll just to run through some of these projects with you. The first one is for municipal technology, includes a core switch upgrade for $100,000. So that's all of the core switches that are kind of the backbone of the network. The next project is an ongoing effort by our town clerk for digitization of records, and this will cover allow her to begin purchasing the software and begin digitizing some of the building department records at a cost of $60,000. The next two projects involve our senior center. The first is a flooring replacement for part of the facility for $50,000, as well as a replacement of the elevator there at the senior center. The elevator is original to the building, and due to its age, it's near the end of its useful life. The next project involves the Adams Library. This will cover phase one of a two-phase replacement at a cost of $450,000. The HVAC system in our library has reached the end of its useful life and has been problematic in recent years. The next project replaces an older staff vehicle for the health department at a cost of $50,000. The next two projects involve our police department. It includes $150,000 for an air handling unit for the firearms range, as well as $60,000 to replace all of the light poles in the parking lot at the police station at a cost of $60,000. The next project is a significant one. It's the replacement of Fire Engine 5, and you see the cost is just over $1 million. The next two projects involve Public Works, $350,000 for sidewalk improvements, as well as $425,000 for our road improvements. Also for Public Works, $150,000 is included to replace the roof at 54 Richardson Road. That roof's about 31 years old and is in very poor condition. The next Public Works project is a replacement of a medium-duty truck that's used for roadway patching for a cost of $105,000. Next is a cemetery dump truck replacement at a cost of $82,500. That replaces an older vehicle. The next project is also a vehicle replacement for $85,000. This replaces an older facilities plumbing van and the idea there is to replace it with a four-wheel drive pickup with plowing capabilities so that it can be used in storms. And then we transition into our public school buildings. The first project is $105,000 for a portion of the roof on this building that we're meeting in tonight. The next project includes $325,000 for the Westlands Community Ed Center for a boiler replacement. Those boilers are about 21 years old. The next project includes $958,000 for a ceiling tile replacement of all the classroom and hallway areas at South Row School. Next project includes $325,000 for the McCarthy elevator replacement. That's the only elevator that serves the McCarthy Middle School. And then $450,000 is included for the McCarthy front entryway renovation project. This is a project that is intended to enhance security at this location. And then the last project includes $250,000 towards the McCarthy roof project. And the concept here is this will allow facilities to begin the design work and introductory work needed to get that project off the ground. That's part of the larger McCarthy roof project that I spoke about earlier. And so that kind of gives you a summary of all the projects. The next slide just shows a history of the capital plan. You can see that, the amount of funding, as we know, varies each year, and the split between general government and school department, that percentage changes. This year it's 41%. Usually in the years that we have larger fire engines replaced, that tends to kind of skew the numbers a bit. And then the final slide is one that you've seen before. This just gives the age of all our school buildings in town, our municipal buildings, and you can see that with the exception of the police station, these are both on the right side of the screen, and Center Fire Station, really all of our buildings are at least 30, 40, 50, 60 years old, even older than that. And that's one of the things that's driving the greater capital needs. So if there's any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer those.
I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
Okay, just to stick with being,
Oh,
I'm sorry, right here. Just being consistent with previous year's questions, I want to address the offset of $66,000 for the boiler in in Westlands, excuse me. And I'd like a little analysis of why. That seems to be like 20% of the project.
Yes.
So I'd like to know, if you could speak to the fact that we have an enormous balance in that account that is never really going to be depleted because it's successful. So why was the contribution only 20%? Why wasn't it more? I'd like to see more spending out of that fund, as you know. I've said this every year. My final time.
You are consistent, I have to say. I have to do it based on something that we can actually justify for the auditors, and it has to be based on a proportion of the number of students who are involved in that particular program, our community education program, and that building houses our CHIPS program, our integrated preschool program, which we're required to have in the district. So the ratio is about 80% of the students in that building are in the CHIPS program, and only about 20% of the building is in the community education program. So I have to come up with a way to justify the expense, and that was just based on the numbers that we had this year.
Okay. So going forward, are there any other plans for, utilizing the funds in that account?
Yeah, I mean, we actually, over the last number of years, we have done some security enhancements at that school, and we've utilized that funding. We put the new playground in, which really does benefit community education because they have the summer program over there as well. That fund largely paid for that particular project. So yes, we do have other projects that are going to come up from time to time, but they do have to be justified.
Okay, thank you. Second question on the roof at McCarthy. Wasn't the roof work done when we did the building project? I mean, how old is the roof at McCarthy?
Yeah, my understanding from talking to Director Clance is about 22 years old.
And is that the typical life of a?
It's typical. They just had a new assessment done of all the roofs this summer. And unfortunately, that roof is in, the condition has gotten worse. And that's what's driving the need there.
Okay.
The roof over the gymnasium and in the locker room area right there, that portion, and then,
back
and then
part of the school.
the back part of the school. And so, yeah, I mean, what you're seeing, I mean, we talk about the new library, you know, the new police station, but all those buildings now, or, and even the project, I mean, think about it. It's been 20 years since this community considered a school project.
Right, well,
And, you know, and it was 2006 or 7, I know, it's just here when they finished the PAC, Performing Arts
Yeah.
Center, and the work at the school. So this is what's happening, is we're now nearing that case where our newer projects, even the center school that we talked about, the new center school and the AC and all the work at the center school, that's now at the point. And so as John was noting, we have a roof program that the roofs are assessed every year, and they're graded and they're scaled. And I think I have one of the slides from our public works director in my presentation. And the frustrating part about the McCarthy School roof is because of the demands at the state level, the most recent guidelines are they won't consider, they're not able to fund roofs that are less than 25 years old for MSBA and their accelerated repair program. So that's what we're going to pursue, we hope, with the assistance of the Select Board and School Committee and the Superintendent for this spring's round for the South Row School roof. The problem is the McCarthy School won't make it to 25 years.
right.
And so that's why, in speaking to Dr. Lang, if we put this on the capital plan for town meeting in April, which if you look at the calendar this year, we won't finish town meeting till beginning of May, because we're always the last Monday in April, and it's late this year. And so the second session of town meeting will actually be in May. Well, there's no way that when you come out of that town meeting, that you're going to have time to procure, design, and do work this summer on the roof of the school. So that was why we did the partial funding, and I anticipate we'll come back at October town meeting to then get the funding. And if the South Row gets approved by MSBA this spring and we get an answer by then, we would do that at fall town meeting and then do those projects in the summer of '25. So that was our philosophy. I can tell you this, just to follow John's presentation, going in, we didn't anticipate the $11 million in demands for capital needs. But then if you looked over the 5-year request, they were 10 million, 11 million, 11 million, 10 million over the whole, each year over the 5 years, because it talks about the inflation and the capital needs. And again, our highest capital request was last year, 4.3 million. When the committee sat in this room last Thursday night, we couldn't in good conscience go below 5.7 because of the capital needs for the community. And that was the number. It was more than what we had ever envisioned recommending, but it was the responsible thing to do for the community. As I said, I think at the previous meeting, you know, when you look to the community, they're expecting us to do the fundamentals, right? And you're seeing these elevators and roof things and so forth. You know, if you lose the elevator at the McCarthy School, well, how does a special ed student get to his or her classes? You lose the elevator at the senior center, you lose half the functioning capability of that building, you know, because as you know, you go in, it's at grade level, you can't get to the basement other than by the stairwell or the elevator. And the same thing with boilers and roofs and so forth. And I think we felt, and I know I personally believe, but I think the committee agreed and felt that we have a responsibility to do the fundamentals to the community. If the roofs are leaking and the boilers aren't working, the elevators aren't working, then people are going to basically look at us as we failed them. And I think that's what we're trying to do is none of these things, and you can see the list that we talked about, none of these were frivolous or niceties. These are things that we've got to do to be responsible for the community today and in the future. That was sort of how we came to that list.
Well, the real reason I asked about McCarthy was because I feel that people at town meeting are going to bring up, well, didn't McCarthy get updates? So that's why I just wanted to clarify that 20 years is the cycle.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for John or on the capital process? Thank you, John. So with this, we'll invite Dr. Denise Pigeon to take a seat at the table and provide us, as much like our community, they're in the initial stages of the budgetary process. And Pat gets the pleasure of sitting through both of them because she just loves it so much. So we'll turn it to Dr. Pigeon and give us an overview of Neshoba Tech.
Thank you. And is someone running the slides?
Yes, Jay.
Okay, thanks, Jay. You can go to the next slide. I just want to say, to begin with, thank you for the invite to this meeting. I really do appreciate that Neshoba Tech is included. We are, continue to be proud to serve the town of Chelmsford as your vocational technical high school, one of our 8 member towns, and one of our founding members. So thank you. Next slide. I always just like to share that we do have a 14-member board, and we do have some alternate seats that are open in some of our other towns, but Chelmsford has done a wonderful job continuing to make sure all of the seats are engaged. We also do, in addition to having our 14-member board, we have a budget and finance subcommittee that meets regularly to review our budget. And I wanted to share that this past year, we have 2 members from the Chelmsford delegation that have been serving on that committee. Looking at this current year, we're having a good year. It's been a good year overall. I will say that there have been unanticipated special education costs. I think that's not unique to Neshoba Tech. I think that's something all schools are experiencing. We're also experiencing needs with staffing and shortages with filling certain positions. We've also had a couple of years in a row of some unanticipated long-term leaves of staff members, which has caused some increases in expenses for substitutes. And as I was hearing earlier from both Paul and John, the cost of all materials and equipment is just much higher than one would ever have expected. And in a vocational technical school, that experience is even larger, because when you talk about the cost of construction, you're also talking about the cost of educating students with the materials in construction. So buying supplies for our plumbing program, buying supplies for electrical, again, all of those expenses have been much higher than we're used to. Before we get into talking about the assessment for FY25 and our budget planning, I always bring it back to enrollment, because as you know, enrollment is really the driving factor in town assessments when we get through the budget process. The trend is similar to what you've been hearing me say for the last couple of years. District enrollment continues to grow. We're actually up 40 district students overall this year. We had such a high interest for district membership or district seats. This is the 3rd year in a row that we did not have any school choice seats available for students. So what you're seeing is our district enrollment is increasing, our school choice enrollment is decreasing as students graduate out. And I anticipate that trend will continue in another year, and we'll have very limited school choice students in the building next year and beyond. Looking at the 10-year trends, since about 2018, we have been on a climb regarding district enrollment. And again, school choice enrollment has been decreasing for the last couple of years. Another piece to think about when we're talking about the future FY25 assessment, again, the major driving factors are the enrollment of the member town, the change in enrollment from the member town, and then the portion of the overall school that the town makes up in that in the total enrollment. So thinking about Chelmsford, we are up 40 district students. There are 6 additional students that are attending Neshoba Tech from the town of Chelmsford. And your portion of the overall population hasn't changed that much. You're currently around 29%, which is about where you've been for a bit now. Enrollment history for the town of Chelmsford. Again, we are projecting 218 students from the town of Chelmsford, which is an increase of 6 students. We do not have any postgrads this year. That's the 2nd year in a row. I always like to tie it back to the historical enrollment highs. We're still not there. The enrollment high for the town of Chelmsford at Neshoba Tech was in 1976 with 313 students. Budget drivers for next year. Again, I don't think that these are things that are unique to our school district. I think this is happening across the state. We are seeing increased needs for students, for special education students, and different needs to meet their educational needs. We have some additional case management staffing needs, direct teaching staffing needs, paraprofessional support, one-to-one paraprofessional support. We're also finding that we have been contracting out for BCBA, or Board Certified Behavior Analyst support, and we're finding that the need has hit the point where we will need to probably bring someone on staff. We're also looking at increasing the training for our paraprofessionals to have several of them certified as registered behavior technicians to support our student population. And we're also finding the increased cost of special education transportation. The daily cost to transport some students has really grown significantly. Other drivers, again, I think not unique to Neshoba Tech. There's the contractual increases, the step and lane changes for staff, the cost of technical program instructional supplies. Again, much of this is construction supplies, so the cost of that is up. And then just to echo what I was hearing from John and Paul, capital, Neshoba is a regional school district, so when we put together our budget proposal and our assessment, it's not just the educational component, but it's also the taking care of the facility and the capital needs that go along with our facility. Our building, if it was on that list of schools, we were built in the 60s, and our last major project was over 20 years ago. So looking ahead again, increasing capital needs to reflect the age of our building. As Paul mentioned earlier, changes in the state mandated minimum contribution formula. With an increasing in-district student population, you're going to see increases in your required minimum contribution in the assessment. There's always an annual uncertainty with what the rate will be for transportation reimbursement for regional schools. In addition, we're focusing on how we go about making adjustments in a slow and steady way to reduce reliance on one-time funds such as school choice or excess and deficiency. And we have been, for many years, committed to annually funding our OPEB liability. Capital, it has been a very busy year and will continue to be busy in the coming years. We did over the summer finish the first phase of the fire suppression system project. So the second floor, we have one section of our building that has 2 floors. We started with that. The project went off without a hitch over the summer, so that was really good. We're also in the process of going out to bid for phase 2 of the fire suppression project, and we anticipate we'll have this done in sections of the building and hopefully finish within 4 years. We are in the middle of an elevator replacement that we had hoped to do over the summer. Unfortunately, it took so long to get all of the components, and we did not want to start the project until we had all the pieces of the elevator to go. We hope to finish that up right after the first of the year. We're also working on replacing a plow, a body in the plow on one of our fleet trucks. And then we're also in the middle of several technical program renovations that are all made possible through a Workforce Skills Capital Grant, which has been a wonderful, state-funded project. We are in the process of renovating our cosmetology program, expanding vet assisting, and expanding electrical, all as part of a $2.5 million grant that we received last year. Looking ahead, FY25 and beyond, again, very similar story to what you're hearing in town. We have an aging building, and we have a lot of capital needs that are coming up. We are working on a plan to try to, accomplish the needs that we do have. Fire suppression is big on our list over the next couple of years. We also know in a few years we have to replace several of our fleet vans. We're also looking ahead, exterior doors, small section of a roof, boilers, parking lot, curbing. All of that is going to be some significant capital needs. And we have some significant work to do on HVAC rooftop units of our facility. We have been, over time, we have 2 pieces of debt that are captured in the assessment. We have one portion of debt that will come off in a couple of years, and we are trying to potentially time an MSBA renovation repair project to go forward with some of these projects when that debt comes off. So we're working on timing that as well. Another piece of exciting news, we also were the proud recipients of a $3.75 million Workforce Skills Capital Grant. And this was an expansion grant, or is an expansion grant, that is going to provide us the opportunity through this grant to expand our instructional space for engineering, programming, and web, and robotics, where we will be able to add about 7,000 square feet to move those programs into this new space, and it will be adjacent to our advanced manufacturing program, which is going to provide a really amazing opportunity to coordinate collaborative projects, share state-of-the-art equipment, and it's really going to be a wonderful project for our students, and it is funded through this grant that we received last year. Looking ahead on the process, our departments are all underway with putting in their first round of budget proposals. Supervisors are looking them over. Moving forward, we are planning to host our annual town officials breakfast. Actually, I do want to point out a change from the slide that's up here. We were originally thinking we would hold it on Friday. After speaking to culinary, they would like me to move it to Thursday so that if there's a snow date, we can serve the food on Friday instead of on Thursday. So tentative date, school committee will take that up for consideration, but I would tentatively schedule Thursday, February 1st for town officials breakfast, and you are all invited to attend. Public hearing on the budget on February 6th, and the first of our 8 town meetings happens in mid-March in Westford.
there any questions for Dr. Fidgen? Denise, is there a next year you're gonna, if things don't change, you're gonna enroll, and then basically there'll be no choice students, and you'll have roughly 800 students, as you said, basically 200 per grade level. Is there a capacity limit for the school in today's, today's time?
That is a very big question, an important question. I would say, I mean, 800 is sort of the ideal capacity for Neshoba, 200 students per class. Could we go up a little higher than that? It's possible. But again, when you're talking about capacity, it's not just capacity of the building, it's also capacity of the technical programs, because the Department of Education has strict rules with your student-teacher ratio, your square footage ratio. So there would be a lot that would go into expanding capacity much beyond where we potentially could be hitting next year.
And if you do hit capacity, what happens? Are there quotas by the community, or is it an overall
That's
quota?
another
wait list?
excellent
What happens?
question. Every vocational school is a little different. In our regional agreement, we do not have quotas. We have a certain number of seats in the freshman class, and we go through the admissions process, and students are selected. We do maintain a wait list. We actually do have a small wait list this year. We have, over the last several years, we start with a smaller wait list, but typically as the year continues, if a student does decide to return to their sending town, we continue to call students off that wait list. But it is not driven by particular community.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hood. If there's no further questions, we'll now transition over to Dr. Lang, our superintendent of schools here in Chelmsford, regarding the preliminary outlook at the FY25 Chelmsford Public Schools budget.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Just a few slides to review with you with regard to the current fiscal -- budget that we have in place. We are fortunate that we have all of our collective bargaining agreements in place. That helped us very much when we're budgeting for fiscal '24. So that's certainly good news. I have really no concerns with our local operating budget as far as any kind of personnel and non-personnel items are concerned, as well as our grants and revolving funds are all in good shape. So I really have no concerns over fiscal '24. We've already begun the budget development process for fiscal '25. We usually start towards the end of October, and that'll go right through the new year. We're still on target to have me present the recommended budget to the school committee during the first meeting in February. So everything is kind of on line with that. We usually come out right after the town manager recommends to the select board at the end of January. A couple of slides that we update annually just to kind of get a sense for where Chelmsford is in the mix with regard to our comparable districts, and to make things more difficult as usual, DESE has come up with a couple of different options to take a look at comparable districts this year. So we have some that are just similar in demographics, and then we have another set that they compare us to that are similar with regard to total enrollment, special populations, and grade spans. And, consistently, I think what you're going to see through these slides is we continue to be right in the middle of our districts. So when it comes to expenditures for our in-district per pupil students, this is again based on '21 data, which was the last available. We're right in the middle of our comparable districts. When we take a look at our student teacher ratio, this is actually something we worked on over the last number of years, trying to cut this down a little bit. So we were currently back in '21 at 12.8 to 1. Obviously, that's not every single classroom in town. It just takes a look at the total number of students you have divided by the number of professional staff, licensed staff that you have on board to come up with that. That's the way that the districts are compared. And again, we fall right in the middle of the pack. On teacher salary, again, this is '21 data. We're in the bottom third of districts when it comes to average teacher salary. This is something that we've actually been working on in negotiations, so I will be interested to see when this gets updated for '22 and '23, what type of an impact that may have. And you'll often always hear about net school spending and how different districts are doing with regard to meeting the net school spending obligation. Really, there are very few districts in the state that don't meet net school spending. The comparison point is really how much over net school spending you're spending compared to your district. So we look locally, obviously, in the Merrimack Valley, and then these are also just our comparable districts. And this was based on '22 data. We were 33% over net school spending. And again, I think you'll see us pretty much middle of the pack with regard to our spending. As we start to take a look at fiscal '25, which is ahead, again, we're fortunate, so we're going into the last year of our settled contracts. We're going into year 3 of 3 with our teachers and administrators and our support staff, so it helps us when we are building the budget that we have some certainty in those numbers. We do have certain cost increases. Our average increase next year was negotiated at 2.5% for our employees, so those are our COLA increases. We obviously have step increases for different contracts, both on the administrative end, the teaching end, and the support staff end. Lane changes would be someone who actually earns a degree from year to year, so we track that separately so we can quantify that over the time. And then we still have in some of our contracts some retirement incentives around notification of retirements, receiving back a portion of unused credited time, sick time, and things along those lines. We have a couple of non-wage-related increases. Our regular education transportation contract is in place. We have some rate increases for that. Special education, student transportation, as Denise was mentioning earlier, and a lot of other districts in our area are just seeing it more and more difficult actually getting vehicles to transport, whether it's our special populations, our homeless populations or whatnot. That typically falls on that page of the budget book. We're going to see a little bit of an increase in that. Out-of-district tuition rate increases, we're going to see a much smaller rate increase this year than we did last year. Last year's was astronomical to what we hadn't seen in a lot of places. We're probably going to average more 4 to 5% as a rate increase this year. But we do have a number of new tuitions in district. So we've had several students actually move to Chelmsford that are already in out-of-district placements that we're going to have to start assuming the cost from. So when you take a look at those two factors, about $500,000 increase in special education tuitions. Utilities obviously will go up a little bit each year. We have that factored in at 3%. So just based on our fixed funding increases next year, we're coming in at about $3.1 million just on kind of a carrying cost year over year to provide a budget in line with the programs and services that we're currently offering this year. And we do know that, again, we actually have an enrollment increase in the district, and this is going to play out for the next number of years based on our projections or whatnot. But we had approximately 70 to 80 new students come into the district this year. And over the next 10 years, we are expecting well over 500 or 600 additional students coming to the district, obviously of all different grade levels, but the projections have been holding true. So there's obviously some costs associated with additional students in the district, as well as some of our already students within the district we're identifying as needing some more services. So whether they be special education, occupational therapy, speech therapy, things along those lines, we are going to have to invest in some additional staffing positions and supports for next year. And this early in the budget process, we're estimating at about $400,000 in total. So we're looking at, and we requested the town manager consider an allocation of about $3.5 million as an increase in our budget for next year. Again, we're still relatively early in the budget planning process. We have kind of proofed out our existing budget. We're working on what that request for next year will be. Obviously waiting also, when the town manager will speak about later in his presentation, waiting to kind of hear about what exactly state aid may do for us, not only the schools, but for the town, because we really are one unit. So just that gives you a little bit of a sense of our budget drivers for next year, where we're at in the process. I'm feeling really good about fiscal '24, looking forward to '25, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions for Dr. Lanning? School? Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Virginia.
The 3.5 million requested local budget increase, what does that translate to in terms of percentage, and how does that relate to previous year percentages?
I don't have that off the top of my head. Do you have that on one of your slides off the top of yours?
Oh, then I can wait, Paul, that's fine.
It's 4.95%, about 5%, and it's above what we've done in recent years. Last year, we provided, Jay mentioned in his presentation, the state provided the 14% increase in special education tuitions last year. So we bumped up an extra $400,000 in the budget. And so that was extraordinary last year. But what's happening is it's the amount's going up, but also the percentages. But 4.95 would be high for what we've recently done in recent years. So that's where we are. Okay, great. All right. Okay, now it's my turn. Again, I think the best way to start is sort of if you've been looking at recent governmental financial headlines in our area, and you can tell these are real recent. You know, you're hearing and reading about the stories of rising healthcare costs as recently as last week. the big issue, the pressure points. I mean, you're hearing it, whether it's prescription drugs, the medical care providers, nursing shortages, what have you. But you're seeing double-digit healthcare inflation, and the state's been unable to, and is still struggling with how do you wrestle those costs. And then, as Darlene mentioned in her presentation, the state's tax collections for the first 5 months of this fiscal year, every one of the months was below their benchmark. And November, the headline last week was the November benchmarks missed by $274 million. And they think that thus far, if you look at there was a revenue hearing at the state last week, they think the state's going to be short probably $700,000 in its budget for the year. And we'll see how that plays out in the weeks and months ahead. The ultimate thing, which would be which hasn't happened since back to the 2008 financial collapse and great recession, was mid-year 9C cuts, and that was when they cut local aid in March. I don't think anybody's envisioning that, but the bottom line is the state has a revenue problem, and then as you'll see in the next slide, they also have a spending problem. But if you go back to previous, again, you're reading in local, Lowell Sun 2 weeks ago, the managers of Drake are talking about devastating impacts that they see in the years ahead as their budgeting process, and talking, to my peers, the town of Westford, they're looking at budget deficits in their budget process that they're doing right now, and I know it just goes on and on. And if you saw the story at the end of last Friday, the state of California has a $68 billion budget deficit now. Obviously, they're the seventh largest economy in the world, the state of California. But the bottom line is there's a deficit. Whether you call it storm clouds, horizon, we're trending in the wrong direction. And then most recently, again, just about a month ago, you saw what happened in Andover, which is sort of the most recent example of labor conflicts with communities. In a case there where they went on strike, and then they basically settled at 15.5% over 4 years, which is just under 4%, after a real difficult situation there. And I think that's the concern. As Jay noted in his report, we have contract for the upcoming year, but I want you to be thinking not just the year ahead, but where it goes after that. Because, as we said, our contracts have 2.5% for the final year. Nobody's settling with anything that begins with the letter 2 right now, and that's going to be a concern and a reality that we're facing. And again, it's just something we got to keep in mind. Other headlines, again, as I mentioned last week, the state had its revenue. They begin their budget process with a revenue hearing. What they do is they bring in the experts and consultants, and they provide testimony from all ends of the political spectrum, and the Massachusetts Department of Revenue, as well as educational institutions. And what happens is they got to come up with a consensus revenue number that both the governor and the legislature have. So that way they're not providing budgets at different levels. So they're going to agree. And what they've all agreed was not only the shortfall for this current year, but they're only seeing revenue growth of somewhere, around 2.5, high of 3.2, what have you, as you see there, for the upcoming year. But I think the most troubling part is, and if you've been watching this, is the last two bullets. If you look over the last 4 fiscal years, state spending from what their general budget is increased by 26.7%, which is obviously a heck of a lot more than the 14.7 growth of inflation in the area. And what basically is the state has a spending problem in which they're doing many noteworthy and beneficial things, from health care to care for migrants and everything else, but it's at an unsustainable level. And that's why you just saw that conflict, and it's going to continue in terms of how does the state meet its ambitions with the revenue realities. And remember, the tax cut they agreed to last summer, that kicks in on January 1st. So we haven't seen the impacts of the state's efforts to remain competitive with other states, while also trying to act in a humane manner to the needs that are out there, healthcare, migrants, and so forth. So again, the themes that I said at the outset, inflation, inflation seems to be coming down, but it's still expected to be at higher levels than the traditional 2% that's been, we really have witnessed for the last few decades. And if you look at the economist view of what inflation levels are, and everybody's trying to predict the Fed and everything else, but the expectation is it's going to be greater than the 2% target that's being met. And part of that's driven by the labor shortage of what's out there, which is not going to go away. And then we talked earlier about supply chain issues and cost impacts. And we hear this as well when we go out and visit, and Pat comes with us and other board members. We go out and meet with employers, and they don't sit there and complain to us about their taxes in the community. Their biggest concern is where can they get quality workers and skilled labor force. Just as Jay noted earlier, we're struggling to get paraprofessionals and lunch aides and teachers and other professionals. It's a real struggle, and that's not going to go away soon. And the reality of it, finally, somebody said, is it's because of the baby boom. The baby boom is retiring, are retiring and retired, and you have a shortage of workforce coming up behind them, and then you have a failed immigration policy that's also not able to assist that need. So that's not going to go away in the short term, or perhaps even medium term. And then again, you've got this uncertainty of what's going on with the housing cost issue and inflation and what's out there. So it's a real issue. The inflation numbers, again, they provide them every other month, so we don't have the November statistics yet. But clearly, the big outlier was 22 with 7%. But if you start adding the numbers up, again, you've had higher than traditional inflation than what we've customarily had and may continue to have. And that really is what's constraining us. Again, as we noted earlier on the capital planning thing, those are the levels of what was submitted in the 5-year capital plan. So obviously, if we funded less than $6 million, then there's a number of items that were deferred and partial into the future years that were worthwhile projects. And there are some that are coming up next year as well. And these numbers don't include any funding for the construction towards a new middle school or to renovate and replace the town's satellite fire stations. As many in the room are aware, the word was received officially today that the town of Chelmsford, similar to the town of Westford and about a dozen other communities, are being invited in to participate in the Massachusetts School Building Authority's project eligibility stage in terms of exploring the process to construct a new middle school. That is the prerequisite first step to ultimately taking on a project, which in this case for the community will be the first time attempted in 20 years. When we talk about when the first successful school project in this community was, you're going back, a half a century. Our newest school, the new high school, is going to have its 50th anniversary this coming year. So that's going to present a challenge to us because part of that process, and we'll get through it. I mean, I'm very confident between our administration, our committees, our experience in the community, we'll complete this process. But it's not only going to require the teamwork and effort, it's also going to request funding. And in my brief discussions with Jay, we're probably looking at $1.5 million to do that feasibility study because you've got to come in and look at everything. And we'll have to see how that gets funded, and there will be reimbursement from the state on that. But for a community of Chelmsford's demographics, as we've known in the past, it's probably a 50% reimbursement rate for a new school. So again, that's going to be a challenge. And again, as we expand the capital needs, which are necessary and vital, that takes up levy capacity within the 2.5 tax constraint, because John has to budget, we have to budget legally for the debt service that accompanies these efforts. The next few slides, these are put together, these nice color ones, I'm a very skilled and very good public works director. We're very blessed. And I'm not just saying that because I have a supporter in the room. But our public works director is watching, I'm sure. She's provided this to the capital plan committee, and I told her I was going to use them tonight. But we have 18 acres to put it in perspective of roofs across the town and the school community. And again, you can see 2/3 of that are in the schools. And as I noted earlier, and this is sort of a summary, those roofs are assessed annually, and they look at the variable useful life and what has to be done to extend the life and invest in that. If we've got 28 buildings, you can see how the problem arises when you've got a roof life that's 20 to 25 years. In essence, you should almost be funding a roof per year, but they don't go linearly, as we know. And as I noted earlier, the MSBA, because of their constraints, they're only really looking at communities that have roofs that are over 25 years. So again, you can see in gray color here our town buildings, our school roofs, and then the total. you can see there, we are really in that, in some of the red for some of those, and that's what we spoke about in our capital planning process. And these are those in the numbers, and basically from fiscal '25 is the first column right through '29 for the 5-year period. So again, even if you look out a year from now, we talked about the second phase of the McCarthy roof at $2.2 million, but you also have the Harrington School roof staring at us at $1.3 million. And so again, you've got other issues in terms of costs. We talked about the community ed boiler this evening, but next year you're going to be looking at the boilers at the McCarthy School, and then the year after, depending on what happens with the Parker School. So again, boilers, roofs, and the last being elevators, key essentials. We've funded the senior center elevator replacement. Obviously, we took no action on the Parker School elevator because of the pending project, but we do McCarthy. But you can see going out a couple years, you're going to have Byam School, and then again, going into your elementary schools, Harrington and Center, as we move out. This is our capital plan funding, and so I really put the slide in to show you, it's not like we've been asleep at the switch and ignored capital for the years. We've been funding at $3.5 million going back 5 years, to 3.8, going back 3 years, to last year 4.4, and now we're at 5.8. And then other include your road funding and some of your other projects. And so obviously that'll be determined this year. But we've been putting in roughly $7 million a year into capital for a community that's running a budget that's roughly $156 million on operations. Again, I won't dwell on this, but this was sort of one of those the third leg of the stool in terms of the issues looking at the economic uncertainty. And what we're seeing, and you'll see this in slides ahead, is you're seeing the squeeze at the consumer level as well, and I mean residential level. When you drive around town, and we see it in our permit levels, you're not seeing the level of renovations and additions that you saw a couple, 3, 4 years ago. And we're seeing that in our level of building permits. And so again, if the things get tighter, it's just going to squeeze the local revenue base as well in terms of our local receipts. And again, the issue with the state, their big thing is this migrant situation and how that has significant cost implications, and it's going to be interesting to see how that's going to come about. So again, coming back to realities of what does it mean? Look at the revenue side. Well, how is our budget funded? More than 3/4 of our budget comes from the property tax. In this year, just approved over almost $121 million for the current year comes from the property tax, 77%. You can see state aid is 21 million, 13%. Our local receipts, again, building permits, motor vehicle excise, so forth, 8% or 12 million, and other available funds, 2% or 3.7 million. That's the big issue. The problem with the property tax being the predominant issue is it's regulated by 2.5%. And if there's a message that I'd ask you to bring outside of this meeting when you talk to the legislative delegation and other state officials is Proposition 2.5 doesn't work in high inflation. It worked for decades when inflation was running at a 2% level. And nobody wants to touch it, it's a third rail issue. But maybe it ought to be adjusted to inflation as opposed to, and I would accept it. If someone said, hey, we'll allow you to raise your property tax, but by 3% if inflation is 3%, I'll accept it. Inflation goes to 1.7% to push it down the other way as well. So I'm not trying to have a one-way street. But the problem that you're seeing squeezing is you can't have your costs growing at 4-5% and your revenue source, your primary revenue source, growing at 2.5%. That's the big constraint. Looking at the property tax bill, as I said this morning, the tax rate was approved. It's 1362. So we could sit here and celebrate that we have the lowest tax rate that we've had in years. But the problem is it's not the tax rate, folks. It's the tax bill. And the reason the tax rate is falling is because the property values are increasing at high levels. And this year was both commercial and residential. But the reality is the average single-family home right now, the average tax bill is approximately $8,575 in this community. And that's an increase of $340 from the last year, which basically means next year you're going to be looking towards $9,000, and then within a few years you'll be looking at a $10,000 average bill, and that's without adding any debt for major construction projects. And we hear it. We all hear it, that the burden, and residents see it, because unlike your income tax or these other things, your property tax is so visible to the resident, because you pay for it quarterly. So that's our issue. So coming back to that property tax issue, what I highlighted in yellow was to show you the reality with numbers. Our new growth, meaning new growth beyond the levy increase, 2.5%, went down. 2 years ago, it was 1.7%. Go back a couple years before that, it was 1.7 million there as well. We're at 1.5 million. And when you think about it, for the upcoming year of fiscal year '25, I've used 1.6 as an estimate at this point in time. And the reason I can do that is we're already 5 months into that growth period. So I can talk to the assessors and see what's out there, which means the new growth for fiscal ‑25 will end in 6 months. So it ends June 30th of '24 for the upcoming fiscal year. And there's really not a lot out there. That if you look at new projects, new development, and so forth, that's why, again, I think I'm being realistic and not overly conservative at 1.6, because we're not seeing much out there. You know, there hasn't been a subdivision that's come before the planning board. The only thing that's on the horizon, and it may move us through, is we're told that within the next month, they will be pulling permits on the West Campus redevelopment of 400 rental units. And they're going to pull those permits for the whole project. And the reason they're going to pull those permits is because if they pull the permits, they're locked into the current code for those developments. So even though those buildings will get built over many years, they're going to pull the permits because that would lock in the current codes, because as we know, the energy codes increase, and what really is affecting them is the increased code and the Massachusetts Environmental Review in terms of energy codes. So that will help us this year. If they fill that building permit, we'll be fine with local revenue for this year. What we don't know and what we'll seek to have is what is their construction schedule, because if they pull a permit in February, well, by June 30th, they're not going to have much in the ground. Right? You may have couple of foundations on a couple of buildings, and then it's going to be phased. You know, you'll see probably construction take place over 3 or 4 years, but that's all we see out there at this point in time. So trying to give you the fully informed perspective of what I see out there. State aid, as Darlene noted, there's 2 big numbers in state aid. Chapter 70, which is uncertain at this point, and general government aid, which generally they've tied to the growth in the state budget. Again, if the general government aid, the growth in the state budget is 2.5%, then that number is, again, a modest number. What we really don't know, as was noted by Dr. Pigeon, is what will be the Chapter 70 number because of the changing and growing enrollments in both the Chelmsford enrollment at Neshoba Tech as well as Chelmsford enrollments in our school system. As you saw last year, we got a very pleasant surprise with the Chapter 70. We got outside of our norm of being a minimal impact, minimal funded community. We don't know what it's going to be for this year as the second year of that funding schedule. Also, the sad part is the governor will release her budget on the 4th Wednesday in January per statute. That gives me about 2 days to finish up my budget to then send it and submit it to the budget. And honestly, that matters is because not only is the Chapter 70 a big variable, but it's also the state assessments that come with that in terms of, charter school assessments, other assessments in there. And so that can have a 6-figure swing and perhaps even a multi-6-figure swing in terms of the budget process. So again, when you come down to state aid, 2/3 of our state aid is Chapter 70 education funding, and 1/4 of it is general government aid. So basically, those are the 2 things that we look at. And I don't think anybody's looking at anything wild in terms of general government aid, so given the state situation. Local receipts. Again, motor vehicle excise and permits are a big issue in terms of our local receipts. And obviously, the big one of that, almost half of is the motor vehicle excise. What's driving that right now is the appreciation of vehicle costs. Electric vehicles, we know, are more expensive than conventional vehicles, and obviously we've seen what happens with the price increases for conventional gasoline-powered vehicles. And how the excise system works is it's not based on what your car is really worth. It's based on the percentage state's formula that goes back to the 70s, where they tax you at 60% for the year before model, 80%, and then it drops down. So even though you could have a 5-year-old vehicle that is quite valuable right now, a used vehicle, we don't get it in motor vehicle excise tax. It's based on the archaic state formula for motor vehicle excise tax that's based on the manufacturer's value and then depreciates at a rapid pace. So again, that's what's keeping our numbers afloat, the our motor vehicle excise. So again, you add those things, those three components up, and we're looking at total revenue base of about 3.7% at this early stage over our current budget in terms of additional revenue sources. Well, 3.7 doesn't add up to 5, and that's going to be a challenge for us as we move forward. Our budget drivers on the town side, I've used the school department's $3.5 million number. Similarly, we track our general government employee compensation. We are, again, also similar to the schools, are going into the last year of our contracts. That's about 1.4 million. Health insurance, the days of 3-4% increase in health insurance are gone. Right now, we're using a number of 10%. I'm hoping it's slightly less than that. The problem that we're having with health insurance is it's based on your experience mod, and also our number of retirees, as you'll see shortly, are increasing. So not only do we have higher costs, but you also have a higher list of subscribers that we contribute towards. I won't know the health insurance numbers by the time I finalize the budget. They usually don't become available till February or so. So that's where we'll be with that. And then other big ones, Middlesex retirement. We know our assessment for next year, and you'll see that soon. It's $744,000, 6.5%. And then we got increases in solid waste and recycling, which I'll touch upon. I'm using a ballpark number for Neshoba Tech. And then we have, just like residents are having, our property insurance is increasing, just like your homeowners' insurance is increasing because of the calamities that are happening to the property insurance market because of natural disasters and the increased value of property. The reason the property insurance is increasing is because the value of property is increasing. And then we have Medicare, which is our payroll tax. Again, looking at it, Jay talked about our teacher ratios. I won't go over that. We're paying roughly, $17,000 per pupil back in FY22. And it's frustrating. You saw it in Jay starts. For whatever reason, the Department of Education has not updated its statistics for well over a year. I mean, the communities submit their end-of-year reports by this time, and yet they've got data that's 2 fiscal years stale, and I don't know if that'll change. But right now, our best estimate going back 2 years is 17,000 roughly. So it's obviously, at this point, it's probably 17.5, maybe, who knows what it is, could be per cost. So I think when people look at their $8,500 tax bill, kind of need to think that we're costing us $18,000 to educate a student. Jay touched upon it his in terms of our school funding levels. We're roughly $84 million of our budget from the town in terms of direct school appropriation and support from other town departments. And again, that's about a third over our required school spending level. I touched upon it about our employee pay levels. Again, final year of 2.5% increase, 1.4 million. Looking at our employee base, you can see we're not adding many employees to our situation. We added 1.5 on the town side this past year and a couple previously. So we're in a tough spot moving forward. In terms of retiree and health insurance, again, I'm thinking it's 10%. That's, hopefully it won't be that, but we will see. But that's a good number to use at this point. And again, I'll know more in February. Here's the data that John Souza compiled in terms of subscribers. I think the thing to look at is retiree growth. I mean, we added 2 employees on the town side for active employees, subscribers this year from last year. But we added almost 20 on retirees. And if you go back to, a decade, you can see that employees are increasing by about 10%, but retirees are increasing by 20%. It's just a trend. People are living longer, and therefore they avail themselves to the benefit. What does it really mean in terms of health insurance premiums? The town share for an employee that we would hire right now will be over $23,000 in the upcoming fiscal year. So you hire the employee at $50,000, you then got to kick in another $24,000 if they take the HMO family plan for the town share of the premium. So that's a real cost. As I said earlier, our assessment to the Middlesex County Retirement System, they do every 2-year evaluations. This is the second year, so we know the number. It's $744,000 greater than the previous year, or 6.57%. So we're going to spend over $12 million. And if you look at the next slide, you'll see that the big bulk of that is that fourth column, payment on the unfunded pension liability of over $10 million for the upcoming fiscal year. So our normal cost is $2 million. We're still paying the unfunded liability that's scheduled to be paid off in 15 years, that right now is only about 54% paid off. And we know when they do the evaluation, that's going to take into effect the end of this month for the last 2 years. We know a year ago the market was negative, and we know this year, the market has sort of come on slightly at the end of the year. But we know that those numbers are going to continue to grow in the future at these levels. So it's a reality that's hitting, again, not just Chelmsford, it's hitting all cities and towns in the system. Solid waste recycling, again, our costs for the collection contract go up because of their labor costs and equipment. And right now, we're paying, the upcoming year, we'll be paying $99.70 a ton, or basically $100 a ton, to tip of our solid waste at the waste energy electricity facility in Haverhill. So again, we have to budget $200,000 for solid waste collection and disposal. For Neshoba Tech, as was noted by the statistics, the town share will actually slightly decrease from 29.65 to 28.87. The current fiscal year's increase for the district was 5.96%, and the members' assessment increased by 3.74. If you apply that similar thing for the upcoming budget, I'm using a round number of roughly $4 million, or a 5% increase in the Neshoba Tech assessment. And I guess we'll see in a few months how, what the real number is. Again, as was noted earlier, we now have over 218 students, and that's based on the October 1st census. So you see that increasing over time. Our foundation, our per pupil expenditure in Neshoba Tech, again, the most recent statistics are FY22, but if you look at the trend, we're probably spending $22,500 per student at Neshoba Tech in the current fiscal year. So roughly $18,000 in the Chelmsford Public Schools, $22,500 at Neshoba, and the reason for that is they're only educating high school students. It's more expensive, not only because it's a vocational school, but it's more expensive to educate high school students than it is all students. Property casualty, again, the growth I talked about in terms of our payroll growth increases our workers' comp insurance premiums, as well as our property and casualty. So there's a 5% there. And again, our payroll, Medicare tax is a payroll tax that we anticipate that going up by $65,000 or 5.5%. So again, what we're trying to do, and what I'll be trying to do in the weeks ahead, is try to maintain our services in this inflationary environment. Try to, we have to meet our fixed costs, and that includes labor contracts, retirement assessments, health insurance. And I think we have to be responsible, as you see the theme here, of maintaining the town's capital infrastructure, because you can't defer roofs and you can't defer the infrastructure because it's only going to cost more. As we'll see, it's more expensive to fix it than it is to replace it. So again, the big uncertainties that we leave here tonight: what will our Chapter 70 funding be? What level will the state provide for special education funding assistance going forward? Because it is a driver, and it's due to the cost for it, but also the enrollments are up. You're seeing the behavioral issues, you're seeing the special ed issues, and can the state continue to help us? And again, what's going to go on with the economy? So again, to summarize everything, we need to budget carefully, remembering that 77% of our revenue growth is tied to 2.5% regulator. There's uncertainty of what's going to happen with the state, as we talked about. And again, we have problems. You don't imagine what the state has dealing with MBTA, migrant sheltering, their revenue issues, and how's that going to trickle down to cities and towns I think the only thing that works for us is it's an election year. And so I think they can't totally abandon cities and towns. They haven't traditionally during an election year, because when they leave, take those votes in July, they'll be going to the communities in October for election. Again, our employee cost benefits in terms of retirements, health insurance, and so forth, and then the issues of inflation. And again, as I said earlier, we've got to be mindful of where we're going in terms of labor costs, because we know as we sit here, we'll be in this room a year from now, we'll be beginning the bargaining stage for new contracts. And we just got to recognize the realities that are out there, because they're going to be sort of be brought to us across the table. And it's not a question of want or of willingness to provide, it's the ability to provide, the ability to remain competitive and to our workforce. And then again, going back, it's infrastructure with 29 buildings, 180 miles of roadways, and technology costs that are growing greater than the rate of inflation. So my final slide and presentation is what I'm seeking this evening is a confirmation that the Select Board, School Committee, and Finance Committee would support the idea of maintaining ourselves at the full 2.5 levy limit of what we think will be approximately $163 million budget. This year, we were just under $40,000 of excess levy capacity, and that's because of rounding. A penny is roughly $70,000, and so we're at levy limit, and what I'm asking is a confirmation that that's what we would envision in the year ahead as we prepare the budget. And so the budget target is roughly $163 million. And again, I'll, by provision of our charter and bylaws, I will provide a recommended budget the end of January. If there are any questions or clarification that I can provide, please let me know.
Any questions from anyone? To any of our presenters, Virginia?
Is there anybody in the Zoom room who has anything? Sam, Dave, or anybody out there? No. Okay. Thanks for hanging in there. Okay.
Sure.
I will make a motion to support the town manager's recommendation to establish a revenue target of $163 million as presented.
Second?
Donna Newcomb seconded.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Um,
Go ahead, Kathy.
Are you going, just as a point of conversation, so the town manager asked for not just on the revenue, right? But
Well-
the whole thing. Do you want it, are you going to do multiple motions?
Well, basically, all I can ask for in terms of revenue target is to use the full levy capacity.
Yeah.
Because that's all I can ask for. And at this point, it's roughly estimated to be about $163 million.
So that,
That's sufficient, yeah.
okay, that's all. I'm sorry for clarification.
Okay, any
That's a
other
question.
questions or discussion? Okay, since we do have a couple people remote, we have to do a roll call vote, so we'll start here. Kathy?
Yes.
Aaron? Jim? Susan?
Aye.
John? Maria?
Aye.
Dennis? Donna? George?
All right.
Virginia? And I'm an aye. And Sam Chase?
Aye.
And Dave Gosselin?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. So it's unanimous.
I'm sorry, Cindy is on as well.
Cindy, good.
Oh, okay, sorry, I didn't realize that. So Cindy?
Aye.
Okay. Is there anybody else, any other voting members? Okay, thank you. All right, so it is unanimous. So I guess that we now can have a motion to adjourn the meeting, unless there's anything else to discuss.
It's 7:32, and I will make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay. And this one, I don't think we need to do a roll call. All in favor?